Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the toughest month of the Timberwolves schedule. The schedule was released on Thursday. We'll talk about what to look out for this year, the high points, the low points, the difficult stretches. We'll also talk about the 14th roster spot. Bones Highland, does he have an inside track? It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you've had a fantastic week. And we're just about a month away from the start of training camp, 2 months away from the start of the regular season. It's happening. We're getting closer. Today is a big day. The schedule came out yesterday. So I want to spend the first half or so of the show, real quick, high level. The toughest stretch, I think. I'm not going to make any major predictions. Although I'd be lying if I said that I didn't go through and kind of do a rough, this is how many games they'll win in each month equals this is their win total for the season. I did do that. I'm not ready to say it yet, but that's kind of how I came up with what I think the toughest month is. We'll talk about a couple of key stretches in the season, but a quick kind of high level things that really stand out when you first look at it, national TV games, et cetera. We'll dig a bit more into it next week because I do think that it is fun. I think it's useful to dig into it. But I want to hit a couple things here today, and then we'll talk about the final roster spot, plural technically, but will they actually fill both? It was a bit more chatter about that this week. I've talked about it before on the show, but I want to get into the player who apparently has the inside track on the 14th roster spot. So lots to get to once again today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can listen wherever. You can watch on YouTube, and you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So the highlights from this year's schedule. I'm going to start with what I think the toughest stretch is, the toughest month of the season. And it's always a little funny. Like right now, obviously everybody's getting ready for NFL season. And so there's, it's fun. I like to listen to it, but the whole strength of schedule thing, you obviously are just basing it off of last year's records, right? What's the expected win? What was last year's win percentage for all these teams, and therefore who has the toughest or easiest schedule? There's not anything else to really go off of, but combine that with what you think from each of these teams this year. So it's far from an exact science. Like a year ago, if you would have said that the Pacers would be in the finals, well, I mean, look at the regular season records for teams like the Pacers. The Wolves went to the conference finals. They only won 49 games. So the regular season, the Wolves, weren't impossible to beat, but they got to the conference finals. So there's obviously so many factors that go into this, but I thought pretty clearly looking at the schedule, there was one month that was far tougher than any of the others. And actually we could, when you look at the NBA schedule, it's October, November, combine those because October is a half month. Then it's December, it's January, it's February, and then combine March and April because April's also a half month. So if you do that, I think the schedule starts relatively easy over the first 2 months. Lots of factors. Yes, there's tough games, but generally speaking, you look at March and April, and it's really difficult. The Timberwolves schedule is really, really, really tough. And I factored in back-to-backs. I'm not going to get super into those numbers or anything, but you just look at the opponents they have in March. They go Denver, Memphis, then Toronto, then Orlando, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors, Thunder. That's a really tough stretch. And then later in the month, you get Boston, Houston, Detroit, Dallas, Detroit as you get into April. So then if you include April, you also have Indiana, your second game against Orlando, and Houston again. So overall, that's a really tough close to the season. Again, I'm not going to get super in the weeds on back-to-backs, but they've got a couple of them in April. I don't think they really have any in March. I think they have one in March. So you layer that into, and I factored it in when I was looking at which months are the toughest, but I came out of March and April. I guess I'll give you a brief spoiler on what I'm thinking. Well, actually, I've said this before on the show. The FanDuel over-under for the Timberwolves win total is 50.5 wins. And I thought that was a little low. I early when the line came out a few weeks ago, I said I'd take the over. Not by a lot, but not 51 wins. I thought, I was going, if it was 51 and let's say it this way, if it was 51.5, I'd take the over on that too for the Wolves for wins this year. Remember, they won 56 2 years ago. They won just 49 last year, but their win differential was that of a 55-win team. There was a lot of bad, unfortunate endings to games. All that to say, I looked at March and April in this schedule, and I struggle. I have them above 500, of course, in March and April, but not by a whole lot. I had a total. What did I have them? March and April. I think I don't really want to get too into records. I had them above 500, but not by a lot. That's a tough schedule. And on the flip side, the start of the season is pretty winnable, pretty not scary. Like Portland's obviously going to be better, and they were good at the end of last season, relatively speaking. And then they go Lakers, Pacers, Nuggets, Lakers again. So that's a really tough start. But then you go Charlotte, Brooklyn. You get a couple of Utahs in there quickly. Actually, Utah, Sacramento alternate for a while. You get a Washington, you get a Phoenix, you get another Sacramento. So you have 3 of your matchups against Sacramento in October, November. You've got 2 matchups against Utah in October, November. You get Charlotte, you get Brooklyn. There's only 2 back-to-backs, in October, November total. So, actually, the very last weekend is a tough back-to-back in November after Thanksgiving. So you got 3 total, I guess, between the 2 months. But October, November, I have them with the record, maybe single-digit losses when the calendar turns to January. I think that's on the table. That's how winnable. And yes, I get it. The Wolves have played down to their competition. They've played up to their competition. Will that stop? I don't know. It's the same coaching staff. It's effectively the same players, the same star players as last year. So perhaps that continues. But remember, 2 years ago, we saw that go away a little bit. It was 3 years ago that it was infuriating. 2 years ago, it was okay. Last year, it was bad again. Every year is different. I don't know that it's like an Ant problem necessarily, although it certainly sometimes is, where he gets up for the really tantalizing matchups, but doesn't for the Wednesday in November against Charlotte. That could happen again. But you still have to look at the schedule for what it is, and some of this stuff comes out in the wash. They may win a back-to-back in Denver, entirely possible, because they won the last 5 games they played against Denver, going back to Game 7 of the playoffs 2 years ago in the second round, and they might lose their, Charlotte game on 2 nights rest. It's actually a Saturday night at Charlotte. I was just throwing a Wednesday night out there as an example of a very not primetime game, but this is, Saturday night against Charlotte with 2 days rest, first game of a road trip. I could totally see them beating Denver in Denver, or at home in this case against Denver on the second night of a back-to-back, but losing on the road in Charlotte. Yeah, sure, I could see that. But again, it comes out in the wash. So I do think the first month and a half is the easiest stretch of the schedule, and the last month and a half is the hardest. And maybe that's good, battle testing them for the playoffs. Maybe it's bad if they've had injuries and they're trying to get healthy against really tough competition. I mean, you can slice it and dice it however you want. I think you can build the case either way. But pretty unequivocally, that's how I see this schedule for Minnesota. I want to talk about quickly national TV games and a couple other scheduled notes before we get to talking about the rest of the Timberwolves roster that they're working on filling out. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Maybe you have subscriptions that you forget you're paying for. I'm a little guilty of that. I feel like I've gotten better, but I don't use every streaming service. Probably could trim that back a little bit. For me, the biggest thing has always been restaurants, food delivery. My wife likes ice cream, get food delivery late at night. That's a thing that happens sometimes, maybe too much. Monarch Money can help you realize how much you're spending on that stuff. Just simply put, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKDOWNNBA. All right. Couple more scheduled notes here. Let's talk national TV games, which is actually like a real number now. It used to be confusing because NBA TV would get lumped in, but with the takeover of NBA TV by ESPN, looks a little different. They're not broadcasting games the same way. So there are 28. Is that number right? 28? Yes, 28 nationally televised games. 7 are on ESPN. The first one being that Lakers game, actually the second Lakers game. The Wolves open against Portland, then go at LA. Their first national TV game, that's not true. Their first ESPN game is their 5th game of the season. But they actually have 3 of the first 5. Like, again, this national number includes streaming games on Prime Video and Peacock. That's the thing that's different. Like, NBA TV might have been over the air, but it wasn't in as many households. Actually don't know what the household numbers are in Prime and Peacock streaming versus NBA TV. It's probably pretty close, actually, if I had to guess. But they play 3 of the first 5 games on quote-unquote national TV. So game 2 against the Lakers at Lakers is on Prime. Game 4 at home for Denver is Peacock, which I'm really excited about Peacock and NBC games for sure. And then because that crew's great, obviously our guy Michael Grady is going to be on those games. He does. I don't know if he's still doing ESPN games now that he's doing NBC, but or Peacock games. No, he's doing Prime. So he's doing ESPN and Prime. My bad. Michael Grady's doing ESPN and Prime. So game 4 is Peacock, and then game 5 is ESPN at home against the Lakers. So 3 of the first 5 and 5 of the first 7 Timberwolves games are already scheduled for national TV. And of those first 7, 1 Prime, 2 Peacock, and 2 ESPN. The ESPN games being home for the Lakers and at the Knicks, and of course, Karl-Anthony Towns. And then obviously things change and they add games and teams get moved around and whatever. Nearly a month goes by before it's Thanksgiving Eve. They are at Oklahoma City for 6:30 p.m. ESPN tip on the eve of Thanksgiving. So that'll be fun. The first matchup of the or first rematch, I guess, the Western Conference Finals from last year will also be on ESPN. Their first ABC game is on Christmas Day. We talked about this the other day. They're actually the final game on Christmas Day at Denver, a 9:30 p.m. Central tip on ABC. And then their other ABC games are a Saturday afternoon against Golden State, which I'm pretty sure they had this year too. That's in January. Of course, the ABC stuff ramps up following college football, which is the primary reason for that. And then they have another Saturday afternoon. Actually, they're all Saturday, Sunday afternoons on ABC. Denver and at Oklahoma City in March are their ABC games. So overall, though, 28 nationally televised games, 7 are on ESPN, 7 are on Prime, 6 are on NBC, which again, really pumped for that. Love Ron Bell Rock. Absolutely love it. 4 on ABC and 4 on Peacock. The other thing, NBA Cup, which I failed to talk about this the other day, but they announced the groupings. Of course, the Wolves are in a very difficult, top-heavy, we'll call it, group. The Timberwolves and Thunder, and then it's the Suns, Kings, and Jazz, who very likely are the 3 worst teams. That might be harsh to the Suns. Well, I don't know. Could be harsh to the Kings, or I don't know. Who knows at this point? And obviously, I'll predict the Western Conference later. But Portland and then those 3 teams are the bottom, and I guess whatever happens with Zion and the Pelicans. But Suns, Kings, and Jazz in the same group as the Wolves and Thunder, and that could be interesting. Again, Wolves Thunder, that Wednesday night Thanksgiving Eve game that I mentioned that's on ESPN, that is an NBA Cup game. So you look at their NBA Cup schedule, and their first NBA Cup game is Friday, November 7th, and that is a home game against the Utah Jazz. Then they host the Kings the following Friday as a Cup game. They go to the Suns on Friday, November 21st at 8 p.m. So that's their first 3. And then their last Cup game, which obviously the NBA is thinking, this could be for who advances, Wolves Thunder. Might not be if one of these teams slips up because it's the NBA Cup. So until you get to that point, right? Like, do these guys care more about it? Obviously, they want to win. I'm not saying they don't. But my theory is that until you get to that final step of like, we could win the cup and win this cash, like, what's that motivation necessarily? Or, but anyway, Thanksgiving Eve, 6:30 p.m. That is an NBA Cup game, Wolves Thunder on ESPN. And hopefully each team will be 3-0 in the group coming into that game. So then the winner will advance. And who knows, given tiebreaker scenarios, differentials, and all that good stuff, maybe there's a chance that one of the teams then would, or that maybe both teams advance. We'll see how that all shakes out. But that is the highlights on the schedule. I do want to, the Wolves actually they do a good job on Timberwolves.com of putting out the back-to-backs and like fun facts, and they've won 9 straight home openers and 12 of their last 13 or whatever. So go check all those out. I'm not going to rattle those all off. But I am going to spend more time digging into this and give you some month by month, like here's the actual hardest stretch within the stretch. Like I know I said it's March, April, but what's the hardest, like 10, 14, 20 day stretch, whatever. What's the easiest stretch? Where are the back-to-backs going to wear the most? Things to look out for. in the schedule, the most intriguing matchups. I'll probably do like a top 5 most intriguing and why at some point here in August. It's just fun to dissect it. The NBA does a pretty good job of giving us some time to do that in this otherwise relatively dead period of the offseason. I want to transition to talking a little bit about the Timberwolves roster. Of course, we talked about that plenty. I've spent a lot of time talking about how they'll fill the roster. And if you've missed all that, I'm going to give you a couple cliff notes along the way on what that conversation is. But the most important thing to know is that the Wolves have filled all 3 of their two-way slots. And while they haven't announced waiving Jesse Edwards yet, they're going to waive Jesse Edwards. They have Rocco Zikarsky, the second-round pick, signed to a 2-year, two-way deal. They brought back Tristan Newton on a two-way deal. And then they recently signed oh my goodness, I'm completely forgetting who their third two-way contract guy is. They just signed somebody to a two-way deal. Enrique Freeman, that's who it was. I love Enrique Freeman. I did a whole segment on how much I like Enrique Freeman. How could I forget Enrique? Those are their 3 two-way guys. But they have 2 standard roster spots available, 2 standard contract spots. And a team has 15 slots. They have to carry 14. And ultimately, they'll need to fill their 15th spot when it's all said and done. But the contracts, of course, are all prorated. And if the Wolves were to fill all 15 spots, they would be really close to the second apron. Gives them less flexibility in case they wanted to take they wouldn't be able to take any salary back. Like we're talking within a few $100,000 of that second apron if they filled the roster with minimum deals. So they have to be very careful. And I've said all along, even beyond that, Tim Conley loves flexibility. We've seen that. They've started seasons in the past under Tim Conley with him in the front office where they don't fill all 15 spots. And then recently, John Krasinski came out with an article, actually on just yesterday, on Thursday, where he talked about how the Wolves are I think he used the word likely to not fill all 15 spots and instead would just fill 14, which is the requirement. So I've been saying that all along, just from Tim Conley likes that we could do a 2-for-1. Remember last year, they actually, technically that trade was a 3-for-1. They got Keita Bates-Diop back and they had too many guys and they were able to fit him into training camp by waiving somebody else that was on an Exhibit 10 or whatever, or a non-guaranteed camp deal. But then they also had to waive Bates-Diop, who had a guaranteed deal. So they had to, that wasn't ideal, right? This gives them maximum flexibility. I don't think they're going to do a 1-for-2 trade, but they could if they wanted to at this point, by leaving that spot open. They also just, buyout market, stuff like that later in the year by saving some of those dollars. They give themselves flexibility. There are no rush, I guess, is another way to say it, to fill all 15 spots. The part that I think was notable from John's piece yesterday was the Bones Highland stuff. John says, and I'm not going to read too much, but behind the athletic paywall, but I want to read this section. It says the Timberwolves have looked into several candidates for the 14th roster spot, including Malcolm Brogdon, a favorite of this show, favorite that I've talked about. That's who I'd want the Wolves to fill that with. Cam Payne, no thank you. And this is my commentary on each player, not John's. And Landry Shamet. Rather have Brogdon, whatever. League sources told The Athletic that those are the 3 names, Brogdon, Payne, and Shamet. However, all indications are that Bones Highland is the front runner to get the final spot, league sources said. Highland signed a 2-way contract with the Wolves in February, played briefly in Iowa, and spent the rest of his time with the Timberwolves. He appeared in 4 games for the Wolves last season and, of course, was a first-round draft pick of Tim Conley when Conley was in Denver. All right, pause there. I'm going to explain my thoughts on that and what I think will ultimately happen, which doesn't differ a whole lot from John Krasinski. But I'll give my thoughts on Bones and the rest of the roster. We'll do that here next to close out the show. All right. So John Krasinski says that Bones Highland has the inside track on the final spot, or as he calls him, the front runner for the final spot. So here's the thing with Bones. When they signed him to a 2-way deal in February, I didn't have a problem with it because the way I described it at the time was the Wolves were looking for a high variance guy. And this is apparently could be wrong if they're still just like, hey, he's a favorite of Tim Conley. But my take at the time was fill the roster with a high variance guy, right? Dante DiVincenzo was coming off the toe injury. Actually was still injured when they signed Bones Highland. They didn't have any other point guards on the roster besides Rob Dillingham. He had been uninspiring in his minutes. Chris Finch clearly didn't entirely trust him. They weren't signing Bones Highland to come in and manage a game and play 20 minutes. That wasn't the plan. He's not Monte Morris, right? That's what they tried a couple years ago at the trade deadline. My take on the signing was they brought him in on a two-way deal, which remember, you can't play in the playoffs if you're on a two-way deal. I thought it was like, hey, let's see what kind of shape he's in, see him play in Iowa. If we run into a situation where we got a guy who like misses a game because he rolls an ankle on a back-to-back, or somebody gets suspended or whatever, and we need another body, we need somebody that can handle the basketball. Bones Highland is somebody you can plug in for a game and say, all right, maybe he'll score 25 and help lead us to a win. He's not the steady hand that guides your ship. He's the guy that you say, we need a shot in the arm. Let's accidentally stumble into this win on a back-to-back in late February, early March, where we have no business winning otherwise. I mean, they've had those games each of the last 2 years. Think back to the, Luka Garza game against Jokic and the Nuggets a couple of years ago. I think there was a game like that against the Jazz last year in Utah that the Wolves almost won. It was the one where I think Ant was suspended after the technical thing. It was, I think, a back-to-back. They ended up losing, but like that's the type of game where you plug in Bones and you're like, all right, let's see what happens. That was my take on it. And if he was great, then maybe you could convert him to a standard deal for the playoffs. That obviously didn't happen. They didn't need him to. He appeared in 4 games, garbage time, whatever. So I thought that was kind of the end of Bones Highland in Minnesota, kind of like the Wolves did with PJ Dozier and a couple other guys that have been in Tim Connolly's that Tim Conley has acquired multiple times over the course of his front office career. I thought that was going to be the Highland plan. Well, apparently that might not be the case. They may just bring him in. Now, of course, they need another ball handler. They need another option at least. They need somebody to run offense in camp, right? Like they do in Summer League when they add a bunch of college point guards that aren't actually even going to play much in Summer League, but we just need guys to run some offense, guys that can dribble. That's kind of what this would be. I mean, it would be Bones. I like right now, it's Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham. With no Nickeil Alexander-Walker, like your third point guard, as we've talked about, is some combination of Dante DiVincenzo, Anthony Edwards, can TJ Shannon initiate offense? That's kind of it. Joe Ingles, right? Julius Randle point forward. So to have another like actual guard who's of guard size that can score a little bit, like Bones is that guy. I mean, there's some similarities between him and Rob Dillingham, honestly. Obviously, Rob Dillingham's got a much higher ceiling at this point, and I don't think there's any world. I shouldn't say that. I think it's unlikely. There's certainly a world where this could happen. I would be surprised, certainly, if Bones Highland ever played in front of Rob Dillingham, save for an injury or whatever. But that I'm a little bit surprised that they're considering him for this roster spot. Now, I know there's been a lot of Wolves fans that have been worried about the Wolves signing somebody like a Malcolm Brogdon for fear of Chris Finch leaning on a veteran with middling production who's in the twilight of his career, a la Mike Conley, Joe Ingles. Not that, I mean, the Wolves pulled the plug on Ingles, 7 games in last year, but leaning on a veteran at the expense of developing a young, exciting, high ceiling player like a Rob Dillingham. You sign Bones Highland, that there's not that concern. I shouldn't say that. Again, it could happen, but there's less of a concern because Malcolm Brogdon is not signing unless you say, here's your role. Like at this point in the offseason, maybe if he's not signed in March and he just wants to win a title, he may sign with a contender, when the buyout market starts rolling. Bones Highland would come in with no expectation of minutes. The Wolves would tell him, hey, man, you're our third point guard. You may or may not get opportunities. This is the deal. And there's no pressure to put him on the floor like there might be with Malcolm Brogdon. Now, I would argue that if you're upfront about that, there shouldn't be pressure there anyway. If you just say, hey, look, there's not a role, but you're on the roster. Bones Highland, I think, fits that, where you don't need to be too bent out of shape about getting this guy minutes. You just kind of live your life, and if he gets in the game, he gets in the game. Which would be few and far between. So I'm a little surprised, but I get it. I understand why. There's the familiarity. They obviously like having him in the building. Guys seemed to like him last year when he was around. So that's kind of where they're at. And I agree with John Krasinski. I don't think they fill the 15th spot. I've said that on the show for the last few weeks. I still think there's value in being competitive with your 14th spot, bringing somebody in that could earn a rotation spot, could play for an extended period of time in a pinch. But then again, that's the advantage of having the 2 spots, is if they choose to bring in Bones Highland, hopefully this doesn't happen, but say somebody gets hurt, is going to be affected for a few weeks, or say the season starts, they're like, oh, shoot, we really do need somebody else that can handle the ball. You could then turn and sign a Brogdon, Payne, Shamet. Like, you could do that at any point, unless, of course, they're signed by somebody else. That's really the only danger in just not doing it now. So I'm not like super bent out of shape about it because, again, it's the 14th spot on a team that shouldn't need a 14th spot to matter. But that's exactly why I'd want to bring somebody in who gives you some value, some depth if you need it to win a random game in the middle of the season that you otherwise may not win. Also for a stretch, right? You look at that stretch last year when Randle was out and Gobert was out, the Wolves lost to the Wizards. Like, it was ugly there for a little while. And ultimately they won just 49 games and were fighting tooth and nail to avoid the play-in at the end of the season. So these spots do matter. At the same time, they're not going to make or break your season, very likely. Or it's very unlikely that they would make or break your season. Highly unlikely. So let's not get too bent out of shape about it. But it is interesting to me that they would still lean on potentially Bones Highland for this role. So that's something we'll keep an eye on. Of course, if anything happens, we'll absolutely talk about it right away here on the show. Next week, I do want to dive more into the schedule. Barring any news related to the roster, we'll spend a lot of time on the schedule next week, looking at guests to have on here in the next couple of weeks as well, kind of some offseason wrap up on the draft, etc. Hopefully you saw that our guys at No Ceilings are now our draft partner moving forward for Locked On, and Tyler Metcalf, who, if you're a regular listener, if you've listened for a while, he's been on the show a couple of times, and he was one of our postcast analysts that filled in on kind of a rotating basis. I did a couple shows with him last year and the year prior, and he's been on a few times before with both myself and Jack Borman on the postcast, and with Luke and Jack. So Tyler does a great job. He's a Timberwolves guy. He's also a fantastic draft mind. So we'll probably have him on at some point as well. And we go check out and follow No Ceilings on X and everywhere. They do a great job with all their draft analysis. So we'll probably do some more kind of draft wrap up on Zakarsky and Beranger and things like that too. So big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder that for your second listen, please go check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where there is no offseason. Our guys Doug, Matt, and Hayes will keep you informed on all things NBA throughout the offseason, as we really, it's the home stretch of the offseason here over the next few weeks. You can find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, just like Locked On Wolves. Of course, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time.